I'm Nayaswami Asha, as you probably already know, and we are continuing with Swami Kriyananda's 26 Keys to Higher Awareness, and we're up to key number 23. That's all this time I've been looking at this little graphic, and I just realized it's the little house key. I doubt if you can actually see it, but this whole time I've just seen it as a smidgen of something. So, 23rd key is what we're working with. And it's, again, very simple. Like last week, we had just one line. This one is, be true to your word, and then the commentary is, always speak the truth. That sounds pretty simple, but it's really tremendous amount of discipline, importance, and potential power in this. One of the things that Swamiji wrote when he first introduced these 26 keys, which of course now was 23 webinars ago that I started talking about it, he was talking about looking at the characteristics of people who are successful and creative in their lives. He didn't just make this up somewhat sort of randomly. He said whenever you look at people who are able to accomplish, he said they're always people of expanded awareness and of high energy. Those were two of the main points that he emphasized. And then other characteristics. And so I want to put that in this context, because these aren't just the 10 commandments of right behavior, although truth often appears on those kinds of lists. But Swamiji is talking about these as the consistently observable, practical expressions of the kind of consciousness that allows us to achieve what we wish to achieve in this world. Now, it's people achieve in a shorter cycle of time in many other ways. So the premise that Swamiji is working with here, which is of course very important, is he's not talking about short-term success. He's not talking about manipulating the material world to make it into something you want it to be. He's talking about the kind of fulfillment that the heart is really longing for, and that can take many lifetimes to achieve. So his observation of those qualities that bring that kind of fulfillment and that kind of success are far different than what people may say or write books about how to negotiate a real estate deal and that sort of thing. Swami wrote a course when he was in India, and it was called Material Success Through Yogic Principles. They might call it Happiness and Success Through Yogic Principles now, something like that. It's published in India, and it's available in the US, although I think they've published it more accessibly in India than they have in the US, but it's still available here. I too also gave a very long course called Manifesting Through the Power of Yoga, which you can find on, I believe, on the Ananda Palo Alto site, or if you go to www.ashajoy.com or .org, it'll lead you eventually to it. The reason I say that, it might be an audio tape. If it's an audio tape, it's on the Ananda Palo Alto site, but go Asha Joy and you'll eventually find it. But the point being, when Swamiji wrote that course, he was in India at the time. He'd moved to India. It was shortly after he'd moved to India in 2003. And he wrote it after a doctor, Swami was in the hospital with double pneumonia, and a doctor came to him and asked him for spiritual advice, saying that essentially it was very hard to be completely dharmic. In other words, completely honorable in his dealings with people, especially financially, when the financial pressures on him were so great. And Swamiji decided to write the course inspired by what the country of India is going through, which is very complicated, where it's coming into its rightful position in the modern creative world, and at the same time has many Byzantine and arcane methods of dealing with things that often involve a lot of bribery or a lot of padding of the accounts, and everything is sort of set up as if that were a part of the deal, and it's a very complicated transition. But Swami wrote the course to assert without any qualification Where there's dharma, there's victory. Where there's right action, everything will come out the way it's meant to come out. And if you meant to come out by God in your own soul, which may or may not lead to short-term success, but will lead to success in the only ways that matter, which is enduring fulfillment. And where one violates the principles of Dharma, then sooner or later that boomerang effect catches up with you. Of course, this is based on the principle of reincarnation, which in India can be assumed, and increasingly in the West can also be assumed, because the short-term results vary. That's all you can say. It just sometimes takes time. Master used the phrase, the thwarting cross currents of ego sometimes interfere or postpone the karmic results set in motion. It's a very interesting principle. The best illustration I've been able to think of for what that really means is, that if you have a tremendous amount of energy going forward, you might along the way be doing things that rightfully and eventually set up an aberration that will thwart your forward movement. But if your forward movement is strong enough, it may take time for those forces to catch up with you. But catch up with you they will. And by that time, unfortunately, one may not remember what you set in motion. But there's a certain point of spiritual development where you have developed absolute faith in the inescapability of divine law. And therefore what is happening to me now can only be happening to me as a result of energy I myself put in motion at some point. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, because things happen that one doesn't like. And you can spend a lot of time trying to figure out who did what to whom, and whether or not the results are justified. It goes on and on. But I was remembering many years ago, I was accused of a fairly unsavory action, of which I was entirely innocent. But if I had had the opportunity to do what I was accused of, I couldn't have guaranteed at that time that I wouldn't have done it. It was the kind of thing that one does out of, what would you want to think of? You know, just an excess of exuberance, a desire for experiences, not evil, but just not always being able to resist one's own impulses. As Swami said, one can't always control the feelings of the heart, and his other marvelous phrase is, well, sometimes these things happen. So it was one of those. But I was innocent. Oh, you got to believe me, I was innocent. But it was very interesting to me, because I could feel that I wasn't karmically innocent. That I was getting falsely accused for whatever I got away with in the past. So even though in this life and in this circumstance it didn't connect, I could feel that it was just like it was the accusation that I'd escaped because of my thwarting cross currents of ego. I'd pushed through and not gotten caught. Now I was getting caught when I was innocent. Can you follow all that? And also at other times when I felt deprived of something I wanted, I can make up a story, and sometimes I actually can, I would say almost to remember a past life. But let's just say I can make up a story in which I took what wasn't mine and enjoyed it. And if I felt guilt, I didn't feel much, not enough to not do it. And so now what's mine, so to speak, is taken away from me. Did I actually think I was going to get away with it? You know, and that's ultimately the crowding in of those memories. And they don't have to be conscious. They just crowd in. Those experiences make impressions on the heart. And they crowd in, and so you're just not tempted anymore. It doesn't look good to you to do it. People learn simple lessons about diet. For example, you're allergic to something, or you know something doesn't make you feel very good. I like drinking coffee and I like drinking tea, but I'm sensitive to caffeine. And so sometimes late at night you're out with friends and they have a different metabolism, and let's go out and have a cup of coffee, and ooh, it's so tempting. Looks so good. But I know for a fact, if I drank that coffee at 8 o'clock at night, 8 the next morning, I'd still just be as wide awake as I could be, and it's just not a good idea. So, you think about it for a second, but you don't do it because you know what's going to happen. And many, many impulses that others may find hard to resist, once the karmic memories crowd in and get close enough together, you're just not tempted. It's just like, why would I do that? Why would I pick up a knife and stab myself in the heart? Even if I might not get stabbed back until tomorrow. It's going to happen tomorrow. And there's no pleasure in the pleasure now, because the consequences of it are just too close. I just know exactly what it's going to be. Now, the karmic thwarting cross currents, that's what I was speaking about. I think of it like, let's say there's a child and he's 12 and he's a bully and he's riding his big bike down the sidewalk, and then there's a 3-year-old on his little tricycle, and the little 3-year-old kind of tries to get out into the sidewalk, and the 12-year-old just plows into him and knocks him over and doesn't even look back, just laughs at the kid crying and just goes on. Well, the 12-year-old is just too big for the 3-year-old to catch him. But, and this is a fun way to think about it, let's say the 3-year-old grows up to be the president of the bank or the president of the company, and the 12-year-old ends up being in a subservient or a propitiatory position in regard to that 3-year-old, but the 3-year-old remembers. And now that he has his chance, not for anything is he going to help this guy out. And maybe everything says he ought to help him, but no way is he going to help him. He just has a gut-level feeling he doesn't want to. Maybe he actually remembers, maybe it happened in a previous life. But it's just not going to happen. So the thwarting cross-current of ego, which is the power of that 12-year-old, looked like he got away from it. But he set a boomerang out. And that boomerang is an aberration within that person's own heart. He broke divine law. He broke divine law by taking his own pleasure, which in this case was the power of him being able to knock people over and just get away with it. That for him at that point was a pleasure. But it's contrary to divine law. And divine law is inescapable. So what that man did, in a very real sense, his soul is pure. And the jiva, which is the individual spark of spirit, it's the drop of water that's going to make it to the ocean. It's the individual spark of spirit that is going to force itself, life after lifetime, eventually to merge with the ocean. And then there's the ego self and all its confusion and and all its attachment to the body and to sensual experiences and to the evidence of the senses. And it's whirling around, literally whirling around the jiva. And the jiva's vibrating with, you might say, the constant sound of Om. And the ego self is just doing all this different stuff, thinking that it's found comfort, happiness, fulfillment. And the jiva just keeps vibrating that Om sound. And the necessity eventually for all that, the rest of that energy to line up with the vibration of the Om, it's absolutely inescapable because it's our own nature. The rest of it is an imposition. The jiva and the Om is our actual true nature. And so when that 12-year-old, and we're just as responsible as children, when we are children, we are just as responsible as we are when we become adults in its own context. Of course, when a child has no language and tries to grab another child's toy or whack someone with their dolly, that's just the only way they have of communicating. But his unkindness, it resonates, it's still there. God is not unfair at all, it's all appropriate. But an act of deliberate cruelty like that is a strong action. So it's an aberration. It's an aberration like this. He has violated divine law, which We are all one in the spirit, and that which you do unto others, you do unto yourself. So that aberration is there, and the Om is pulling, and then sooner or later, that aberration has to be straightened out. And the way it generally gets straightened out is that another vibration hits it, and you have the opportunity, because your own heart gets broken, or somebody drives into you, or you're there needing a favor and you're utterly disregarded, whatever it might be. You have an aberration in your vibration. You have a whirlpool in one of the chakras of Vritti in the chakras, and it will draw to it out of the great cosmos whatever the counter wave is. And when that happens enough, as I was saying at the beginning, we begin to have the idea in our mind that why would I set up these aberrations to the Om, because inevitably I'll just get the counter wave, and the counter wave will just knock me back to center, so why would I ever want to leave center? It's very good karma to have your karma come back to you quickly. It's considered to be good karma because then you know exactly why it's coming. Swamiji often told the story of his delight when he was given a motorhome. He was starting off on a cross-country tour of America. He actually did 2 cross-country tours in the course of a year. And having a motorhome made that travel completely different. It was much more pleasant to go down the highway because you could sit on a comfortable couch, you could have your lunch, you could open a magazine, you could read a book, you could just do so many things while you're driving down the highway. And when you arrived somewhere, the motorhome was Swami's bedroom. So he was always at home. He never had to pack or unpack. Plus he was always in his own vibration. And it just made cross-country travel completely different. I too traveled for a number of months once in a motorhome, and it was just a world of different than doing it in a car. But he'd wanted a motorhome for a really long time, is how he put it. And when this was gifted to him, he was just so delighted. As he put it, he was skipping up and down the aisle. And inside his own heart, he was saying to himself, I have allowed my happiness to be conditioned by owning this motorhome, he said. Just as I have allowed it to define my happiness, it's going to have to define my unhappiness at some point. And within a few days, there was I'd call it an accident, but it was so minor. The motorhome was parked outside a grocery store, and I guess it was probably, Swami always says it was in gear, but maybe it was in gear with the motor on. It was in gear with the motor on instead of in park, and it inched forward and hit the wall of the store. Not hard enough to injure either the wall or the motorhome, but Swami was standing in a very awkward position at the back of the motorhome at the time. He was sort of stretched out with one knee on the couch, and he was reaching up in a high shelf for something. So at the moment of impact, he was completely off balance, and he was thrown to the ground. And he put his hand out to break his fall, and he broke his middle finger. And since he was playing the guitar, it was an issue for the rest of the tour. But he said as soon as he broke his finger, it was like he relaxed. He said, the motorhome made me happy, and now it's hurt me, and now we're back to zero. And it was just a very sweet way to put it. But the fact was, there was no secret about it, because everything that happens to us is the result of energy that's been set in motion, but we don't remember setting that energy in motion. But when we can remember, it's perfect. I've told this story before, but it's such a perfect story. My own experience of instant karma. It was in one of the very first pilgrimage tours I helped lead to India. We went to a temple in Varanasi. That was before we, I would say, had gained control of our own tour, because we had a very specialized idea of where we wanted to go. And we had a very nice man who was our guide in Varanasi, but he was also extremely proud of his city, and he had his own idea of what our agenda should be, which was quite different than ours, but we eventually came to a harmonious way of working with him, and he was wonderful for us. But in the early years, he sometimes hijacked our bus. And on this particular thing, he hijacked our bus and insisted on taking us to this very old temple dedicated to Divine Mother as Durga in Varanasi, which is in fact a very sacred place, but Varanasi has a big problem with monkeys. because it being very Hindu, they don't feel it's right to kill the monkeys for many reasons, including that Ram's great disciple, Lord Rama's great disciple, was Hanuman, who was a monkey. But it's also just because they don't want to kill animals, so they can't poison or shoot them or trap them, and they multiply, and they're often quite a menace. So in this temple, which is called the Durga temple, is also called the monkey temple. Not because monkeys are worshipped, but because monkeys dominate. And I was newer into India, and Varanasi is a very ancient city, and especially, and I'm talking 30 years ago, was not always maintained well. So it was not easy to be in that temple. I was upset because we had been dragged there against my will. I was upset because it just wasn't very clean. And there was a pujari, a priest there, who I was group leader. I was one of group leaders. Group leaders is a big concept, group leader. And being group leader, he kept putting this marigold garland around my neck. But the marigold garland had outlived its expiration date. And it was, I can smell it. It had this particular slightly nauseating smell of rotting flowers, and he kept putting it on me, and I would find a way to take it off and set it somewhere, and then he would find it, and he would find it and put it on me again. Plus, the whole temple was dirty, and there were monkeys all over the place, and I hadn't really figured out the deities very well yet, and I was doing a lot of negative thinking. I was doing a lot of negative thinking about old Hindu temples, about Iki pujaris, about dead flowers, about monkeys, and about Durga herself, who should take better care of her house, for heaven's sakes. All of that. I'm just going along, and because I'm going along like this, I'm not paying attention. I'm not watching the first law of monkeys, which is you don't walk between the monkeys. And I did. I walked right between the monkeys. So I was like there was somebody's friend or baby or something was behind me, and the big monkey was in front of me, and he did not like that at all. And he came right at me, and he jumped on my back. It's interesting to me that I reacted very strongly, but I guess I wasn't as afraid as I thought I might have been, because I apparently, and I remember doing this, but I never made a decision to do it, and people watched me. It wasn't that big a monkey, but I pulled him off my back, and I threw him on the ground, and I said, "Get away from me, you filthy thing," although I said it very loudly, and by which point everybody's looking at me. And then I had on this skirt. I didn't wear Indian clothes then. I had on a skirt, and the monkey came back at me because I was still blocking his way, and he sunk his teeth into, thank God it was my skirt, not my person. He sank it, and then I started pulling on my skirt, still yelling and insulting him. You know, let go of that, you awful creature. You know, just tugging like that. And I pulled so hard, he ripped a big bite out of the skirt, by which point everybody was around me, and they were chasing the monkeys and getting me to safety and so on. But I had no doubt as what had happened to me. I just thought immediately, do not mess with Mother Durga. I just what could I have been thinking? Who am I, this tiny little American twerp who walks into this ancient culture? This temple has been here for hundreds of years. And I'm just, no, I don't like this, and I don't like that, and I don't like this, and I don't like that, and you guys should be more like me. And it was, whoa, instantly. And I was extremely grateful. And I went over to the statue, and I pronamed, and I asked her forgiveness, and I've been very, very careful ever since. It's been very important. When I came home, I went to the local store, and I bought this decal of a monkey, and I patched my skirt with a decal, and I wore that skirt in India for many years to come, and every time I'd see the monkey, I'd always remember, you know, just, you don't know everything, child, and you set these wrong thoughts in motion, there's no telling what's going to happen. And thank you, God, for just a second like that. It could have been, you know, if I don't know what, it could have been much worse. Now, coming back to all of this, our topic for today is be true to your word and always tell the truth. These are divine principles. These are not just the burning bush giving you a suggestion. This is talking to us about the way we're made. This is talking to us about the Om vibration that the jiva is attuned to and trying to get us to hear. In Indian music, they always play the tambura, and it's just these repeating notes that are tuned to whatever raga or whatever else is going on, and it doesn't vary. It just keeps going, and in all the improvisation that characterizes that really wonderful kind of Indian music, whether it's sitar, sarod, or whatever it is, tabla, everything, dancers, singers. There's always this steady in the background, and it allows people to go way out, but to never lose their anchor. And it's beautifully symbolic of what it is that we're doing as souls on our journey from captivity to freedom, which is that we have this great experience that we go through and all these creative ways, but really it's the always coming back to that. And when Swami's talking about always telling the truth, he also makes a distinction. He doesn't explain it here, but he makes the distinction in many other places, where he talks about there's a difference between the facts of a matter and the truth of the matter. And when we're talking about real power, we're talking about the truth of it. And I remember now that I started earlier in this conversation about Swami's course, my version of it being called Manifesting Through the Power of Yoga, my version being my class series on the book. I was using his book. I wasn't using anything else. That when Swamiji came out with that course, there were other prosperity courses. There's a lot of them. Tony Robbins at the time, when Swami was doing this, was well known. Maybe he is still well known. And there were other famous prosperity courses, and Swami was asked what the difference is between his course and other courses. And the expectation when that question was asked was that he'd give some kind of a concrete answer. But comparing the features and benefits, Swami's answer was, I'm the disciple of a great master. I love it when Swami gives an answer that's just so far out of the box. What's the difference between your course on prosperity and other people's courses? Well, I'm the disciple of a great master. But I spent a little time, I had the assignment, as it were, of writing some promotions for that, and I spent a little time with that. And what I realized is that many people try to influence the material plane from the material plane. I want to teach you how to negotiate a real estate deal. I'm going to tell you how to, get your boss to notice you. I'm going to tell you how to make the right kind of presentation. I'm going to tell you how to show your leadership skills, or whatever it might be. So you're looking at all the pieces on the board, the flat board, so to speak, all the different pieces of possibility, how to get into Harvard, how to go to Wharton Business School, how to leverage this with that. And you're just moving them around, trying to get more in your corner and whatever you might be doing. But Swami's perspective, as a disciple of a great master, he's looking, so to speak, down on the material plane from the level of enormous spiritual understanding. And he's not really just trying to rearrange it on that plane. He's trying to draw the potential of where we're living, which is in this plane of consciousness, upward into the spirit. So everything about moving through the material plane is based on where we're really trying to go, which is to take our inner self back to the ocean of spirit, rather than just spending another incarnation doing laps around the board, which is what everybody does. Oh, they're going to teach us how to. Now, those kinds of teachings are actually not useless, or not even not spiritual, because what they're teaching is awareness, self-mastery, and the direction of energy. So whether a particular kind of training is forward or not depends on where you're standing. if you've never had any kind of focus or ambition to bring energy to a focus and make something happen, a passionate effort to get rich is forward momentum, because at least energy is moving. But once you've done a few laps on that board, which is where anyone who's drawn to Master's Path is, we've done quite a few laps on that board, then you want to be working in the material plane in such a way that the result of that effort is to elevate your consciousness, and not merely to move the pieces around. But the power to move the pieces around is also helpful if your intention is to serve. And that's, among many things that Swami writes in that Material Success course, is the question you always have to be asking is, how can I serve? And once you ask, how can I serve, there's a lot of things you have to do on the material plane in order to be able to serve, if this is where you're living. Master himself said, every good, noble, or philanthropic enterprise sooner or later comes down to a matter of money. And he's right. You can dream on all you like, but many people's beautiful dreams all crash on that simple capacity, that simple reality. So the capacity to influence this plane of consciousness, especially from a high vibration, is very, very important. Now, this is where truth and facts come into play. A person can appear successful according to the facts, but they might not be at all successful according to the truth, because they're setting in motion so many aberrations, and their cross currents of ego may cause them to have a positive trajectory even for a long time, because that positive trajectory can, keep you going even for many incarnations before the momentum of it gradually begins to fade. But it will, and it absolutely must. Now, the power that we have when we cooperate with truth, which is to say, when we cooperate with the underlying inescapable realities of creation itself, if we're working with that energy, we're always going to have more energy than if we work against it. Even we may look like we have more if we're working against it, but sooner or later it catches up with us always. Surrender to me, and I can add your power to mine. And so the way Swami puts it is twofold. Always speak the truth and always be true to your word. Sound itself is a fundamental building block of creation. Everything in creation is made from the Om vibration. In the Western Bible it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. On the Eastern tradition, they talk about that simply as the Om. I mean, word, what does word mean? Word means sound. And from the Eastern side, they talk about the Om vibration as being one of the 8 manifestations of spirit, simply as sound. And we are made of sound vibrations, sound and light vibrations. That's why music has such a different effect on us than speech. Speech has to be translated. I mean, the intellectual concepts of words have to be translated. But music, as they say, is the universal language, because everybody can feel and just sort of know what certain vibrations do. And also, therefore, we're profoundly affected by it. Swamiji has always placed great importance on music and what music we listen to and what music we sing. And he himself has composed hundreds of pieces of music and has often said that the success of Ananda is because of the music. Because we sing the music that he wrote and the music that Master wrote, which vibrates as an aspect of Om with the particular quality that is the nature of our path. Our path has unique characteristics because we follow a particular line of masters, going back to Jesus and Babaji. And there's a particular line of vibration of Om, and we find that vibration. That's our tambura. Our tambura is keyed to that. Our jiva is keyed to that. And it's the constancy of that sound. When we find it, we're able to rise up on our own particular ray of discipleship. And the fact that all over the world, Ananda people sing the same music just puts us in harmony with that. There is a divine truth in that music for us. Swamiji was once asked, "What's your favorite music?" And he answered, "Oh, mine." And then he sort of corrected himself, saying, "I never actually think of it as mine." He said, "It's the music that I was given, rather than the music, it doesn't belong to me." But then he laughed and said, "If you'd asked me what I thought the best music is," he said, "I wouldn't necessarily have answered that. But when you ask me what my favorite is," he says, "because it is the vibration of my own soul." But Swami's vibration, his soul vibration, was the vibration of his guru, because he himself had attuned himself so powerfully to his guru that their vibrations had become the same. So that music coming through, the more we sing it, the more we hear it, the more we play it and act through it, the more our actual self, our actual Om self, and the Om is simply a more subtle dimension of our own nature, the more it begins to vibrate in harmony with that actual lineage, so to speak. And that lineage is our salvation. It's just extraordinarily powerful. I am in this constant struggle against the horribleness of so much music in our planet these days. And it, on a certain level, when you think like that, when you hear how dissonant, sometimes even violent, I would go so far as to say satanic, some of the so-called music is, even especially sometimes very popular music. No melody, just dissonance, noise, sound fighting against itself. When there are lyrics, they're often absolutely debased. And when people are constantly bathing in that sound vibration, then their own molecules will line up with it. And then people wonder why they're so unhappy, why they're so lonely, why it's so hard to keep their relationships together. It's not the slightest mystery. It's just as clear as a bell, you might say, or as muddied as a bell. But it's become the vibration of our times. What can I say? I walked in, whenever I start talking about this, I always have to go to the YMCA where I swim, and where they have exercise classes, and for some crazy reason they think they can play music in this huge indoor, where there's 2 indoor pools. It's crazy. And there's one instructor in there. I'm sure she's a nice person. She appears to have no center. She's just always restless. Of course, she's an exercise teacher, but she's just always restless. Everything about her is restless. And she just loves to play that music so loud. I walked in, I just opened the door and went into the room, and it was blasting like you were in a very small nightclub like they do. And it was just a swimming pool, and it was very bad music in the sense of dissonant, and it was so loud. And it's like you walk in, and it's like all of a sudden it goes right through you. Sound goes right through you. I walked right up to her. Turn it down like that. We have this little war going on, this pleasant little war, she and I. But it was almost like I panicked, because all that sound in the room, and I brought my sound self into it, and all of a sudden my molecules are all trying to align with that music, and no, I don't want myself to align with that music. And because I've established a certain authority from the authorities, I got her to stop it. Now, every time we speak, every time we actually have even thoughts, but especially when we speak, we are running certain vibrations through us. And when we run vibrations through us that are dissonant to reality, then we set up within ourselves this huge dissonance. We set up an internal dissonance because we're no longer vibrating with a higher reality, when we deliberately misrepresent even our own perceptions of things. This is always speak the truth. And people misrepresent the truth deliberately a lot of times, either because they're not putting out enough energy and they just randomly use words, because they're afraid to speak the truth, because the truth is would be unpopular and they want to make things sound better, because they're trying to manipulate people with false statements. And every time you do that, yourself is trying to align with the jiva in you. It's trying to align with that Om, and you yourself speak words that are dissonant with that Om. And the more one consistently reinforces within yourself dissonance to that Om vibration, then to that extent, well, several things happen. You destroy your own attunement, and therefore you destroy your own happiness. You set aberrations in motion that will cause dissonant things to be drawn to you. You enormously weaken your own magnetism because you're just throwing away all this energy. And this is, truth is, I wanted to say there's a difference between truth and facts. Sometimes facts are not truthful because the truth is the divine truth. We are all children of God. We are all perfect in our jiva, although we may be terribly flawed in our ego personality. Everything in all of creation, there's a happy ending for everything. When you look from the superconscious level, every problem has a solution. All disharmonies will ultimately resolve. Joy, love, peace, calmness are the manifestations of God. And whatever it may look like, that's always the underlying truth. So to merely be factual, to say you look terribly sick today, or your nose is much too big for your face, or how could you possibly have thought that haircut was flattering? I mean, all of these things may be facts, but the divine obligation to help each other move forward, that's the truth. I watched Swami Kriyananda, and I know I spoke about this quite a bit last session, because I was talking about Swami's ability to get along with people. But he was so exact in the way he spoke. He never flattered. I was conversing with someone about the concept of flattery. Sometimes we try to buoy people up by just pouring praise upon them, but once we move beyond what is really there, we don't really help people by doing more. People are sensitive to these things. Swamiji was always completely supportive, but he was always supportive because he added truth to a situation. I was trained by him for many years. Let me phrase it differently. He tried to train me for many years in order to write. I could always speak. I was always reasonably confident in being able to speak. But even to this day, I still struggle a bit with writing, but not like I used to. But I had to submit my writing to him a great deal, because I was writing mostly promotional material, or occasionally articles or brochures, and he was very closely involved with the work I was doing, and so he had to look at it. And most of the time when I wrote was not acceptable. He had to work it over again. But I really so profoundly appreciated that he was very supportive. He had great confidence in my ultimate success, which took decades to really manifest. The success that he saw I was capable of took decades to manifest. But he was always so truthful in his response to me that it gave me I was talking about this the other day. I had so much trust in him because he always told me the truth. And he was very kind. He was very sensitive. He wasn't truthful in the sense of being brutal, because he knew I had a very delicate nature, and even though I tried to be tough, too much criticism did not help me. I didn't have the inner fortitude to stand up to it. So he was always truthful to me, but he was always conscious of who he was talking to and what my limits were. But I had absolute faith in what he said. But it wasn't just the faith of, oh, he's Swami Kriyananda and all of this. It was the faith of that he always told me the truth. And I always knew he would. And it's such a powerful force when you can become that kind of person yourself. And also, I mean, it says in Patanjali, if you always speak the truth, your words have the power to manifest. When you dissipate your words with half-truths, you have no energy. There's just no force behind what you say. And you can, give sermons or give lectures or try to inspire people to work or want them to be your friends, whatever it might be. But if they know your words are just floating around and they're not anchored anywhere, it's why people have no magnetism. They don't know why they have no magnetism, but that's why they have no magnetism. But it takes energy and it takes consciousness to be able to speak truth. And it's great fun, actually. At first, in the first many years of my spiritual life, I was too frank. Brusque was a word that was used for me once, which was actually a very good word. I had to look it up, but it was the right word. Just means just too quick, too harsh. Sometimes I still do it, but not as much. That's all I can say. But brusque is not truth because it doesn't take into account the reality of the other person. It doesn't take into account your unity in spirit. And therefore what you do has an impact. And if you ignore that impact, you're not acting in truth. Swamiji was always conscious of the impact. That's what he disciplined me on many occasions by saying, Asha, you have to think about the effect of what you're saying. Because sometimes I defended myself by saying, well, but it was true. Yes, Asha, it was true. But it wasn't true because you weren't considering the effect of what you were saying. And therefore I was being merely factual. I wasn't being truthful because truth is the divine force acting through us. And the divine force, one of its qualities is love. And that doesn't mean you always have to be nice, but you always have to act with awareness of the impact. Now, of course, sometimes people are just going to do what they're going to do. Or karma is such that no matter what you do, it's just going to come out a certain way. The whole Bhagavad Gita has many, many verses about nishkam karma, acting honorably with dharma, but without regard for the fruits of what you do. Meaning you're not doing it for what you're going to get from it, because sometimes it's just not there to happen. Your intention is pure. That's what Swami also said to me. He said, one, you have to think about the impact of what you're doing. But then he also said, but if your intentions are pure, meaning if you have sincerely done your best, and it still comes out a certain way, he said, God reads the heart. And your magnetism comes from your heart. It comes from what you intend. Even if it doesn't always work out the way you want, your magnetism comes from the purity of your intention. Blessed are the pure in heart. The other part, he says, is always be true to your word. And this is another sort of force that we set up. When we say a lot of things that we don't really follow up on and don't mean, then our energy just begins to drain out. Now it's most obvious when you're working with children. If you say to and children they just get it. I've observed parents, unfortunately, too often that don't, for example, they don't work together. The father says, you have to eat 3 spoonfuls of rice before you can have any dessert. Mother says 1.5. You just have to have 1.5. And the child knows immediately that there's no power here and just keeps all the power for himself. 3, 1.5, I don't really have to eat any because nobody really means anything that they say. They just talk. Or they say, you have to go and go to your room, or you have to go wash your face, or I want you to sit in the chair. And then the child just doesn't. and nothing happens. And the child immediately knows there's no power here. Of course, it's extremely unstabilizing, destabilizing to the child to be in an atmosphere where people are not true to their word. It's extremely destabilizing. And parents who don't understand the absolute importance of behaving in truth, to speak the truth and then to stick by their word, well, they have hell to pay later. I watched a good friend of mine with her son once. He was a handful, but she was a match for him. And she had laid down some very appropriate boundaries, and he was trying to wheedle past those boundaries. He was maybe 4 or 5. And he was doing his job. His job was to test his willpower, and her job was to make the boundaries clear to him. So she just looked at him and said, "Have I ever changed my mind when I speak to you like this?" And she never had, because she was a very smart mother. And the boy thought about it. He said, "No." And she said, "And I'm not going to change my mind now." And he was a very strong-willed child, but the power of truth was there. It was like she didn't lay a boundary down without thinking first as to whether this was the right thing to say. In other words, she was telling the truth as far as she could see as a mother. This is the boundary. And then she was true to her word. And for him, you can see, even though he was annoyed, but there's another part of him that was just, oh, think of the relaxation. The people are speaking the truth to me and they're sticking by their word. Think what that means. And that's, I mean, when I come back to Swami Kriyananda, because really he was my father in every possible sense of the word except biological. And just the comfort there was in having a heavenly father or personification of God himself, the guru. The word for disciple is also chela, which means child. And all of us, certainly put myself in that category. I was certainly a child compared to Swami. I always, after he died, I thought, well, the last remaining adult has left the planet. Now it's just us kids. I mean, last remaining in my world. There he was. Now it's just us kids. I mean, the fact that I'm 65 years old or 69 now doesn't mean anything to me. I'm just still a chela. But Swamiji was always, he always spoke the truth and he always stuck by his word. If he said he would do something for you, for anyone, he would simply do it. It just never came up that he wouldn't. It wasn't even a point of discussion. He would just simply do it. That was it, because I said I would. And I've done my very best to model myself after him in all those ways. And on many occasions, sometimes you speak a little impulsively, or maybe later you regret that you promised it. But I've tried to do exactly what Swami said we have to do. No, I said I was going to do it. So I'll be true to my word now, whatever it might be. I said I would go around the neighborhood and get signatures for this political petition. I wish perhaps I hadn't said I would, but I did say I would. And now, merely because it's inconvenient, you see, also, all the time we're our inconvenience. When I was very new on the spiritual path, and when I was first living at Ananda, I had a habit, and it was just a lifelong habit, of, I wasn't selfish, self-concerned and self-centered perhaps, but not selfish. So I wasn't small-minded, but I was often conscious of whether I was having fun or not, and whether or not it would be possible to have more fun than I was having. So in many circumstances, and I have a very quick mind and a strongly influenced Gemini mind. So I can keep track of a lot of different things at the same time. And so I would often, in situations, calculate my own advantage, not to have it over other people, but to make sure that I was making the choice that was going to be the most fun. And as a result, I was quite changeable. I'd head out in one direction, and if I got a better offer, I would take that offer. Not in the sense of being irresponsible, but just, well, I guess irresponsible is a little bit of the word, a little bit of an airhead, just doing this and doing this and doing this. And I never thought about it. I actually thought of it, if I had stopped to think of it, I would have thought of it as a virtue, because I was always maximizing opportunities. And so, faults and virtues sometimes get a little mixed up. I always maximized opportunities, which in the end has actually been a very positive quality, because I still do it, but I do it with a little more sense than I used to. And maximizing opportunities for myself and others, why not? Especially when the motivation is, how can I serve? But in this case, I was just didn't have a perspective. And I remember I set off for work one day, and I lived over in the part of Ananda village that's called Ayodhya, and I worked over at the publications building, which is now the Hansa Temple, for those of you who know it. But it was originally built as the publications office, and we didn't have cars. Very few of us had cars, so it was a 1.5 or 2 mile walk from one side of the hill over the hill and then over to the publications building. And you would go through the farm area, and you would meet a lot of other people, and they were all walking. And one day I left home at 8 in the morning, and I got to the office at 4. And my friend Seva, who was my spiritual mother, is my spiritual mother, and was closely supervised me during that period of time. She was a woman of few words, but the words she spoke, she always spoke the truth, and she meant what she said. And she just looked at me, and all she said was, "Good morning," like that. And somehow or another, because she always spoke the truth and she meant what she said, I got it. I could feel what she was saying to me. Because I had set out that morning intending to go right to work, but I just kept maximizing my opportunities, and I just didn't get there till 4. I wasn't at the river just bathing in the sun. I was just doing other stuff as I went. And I just began to discipline myself, especially to Seva, who was my constant companion. And I started paying attention. I started paying attention to what I said I would do. And prior to that, honestly, I had never really paid attention. I hadn't thought about it. If I said I was going to go to work and be there at 9, but a better opportunity came, I just took it. I didn't even notice that I was constantly just pouring out words with no magnetism behind them. But I began then to notice what I was promising, what I was affirming. And I began to begin at least to try to bring it into alignment with what was true. And then I began to hear exaggeration. Then I began to hear timidity in speaking what was actually accurate. I began to hear habitual negativity, over criticism. I began to hear not thinking about how can I be supportive. And I began to think, how can I say the truth, but in such a way that it's a deeper truth because it uplifts. There was this woman who was a little bit difficult for some people to handle. And Swami just put it this way, "Don't you just love her intensity," is what he said. I've always remembered that. We all knew what he meant. But yes, she was a very intense person. So you could say, oh, she really gets on my nerves. But you could also say, yes, she has this marvelous intensity, which she did. And you were saying what you needed to say, but in such a way that you were closer to the truth. I mean, what I'm describing to you is not something that I did for a month. It's what I've been doing since 1971 to 2016, which is put out enough energy with enough consciousness to hear what you're actually saying. And realize that every time you speak, you are not only expressing, but also creating your consciousness. And what kind of a consciousness do I want to create? And you're creating your magnetism, that you're either just a constantly dripping fountain that's just a dissipated force, or you're a power that can really move. Swamiji, he could change the world with his speech. He could change the world with his will, because he knew the power of truth and had disciplined himself to it with absolute commitment. It's a very simple practice, but one of the most powerful ones we can follow. Be true to your word and always tell the truth. God bless you.